This is a video to accompany the questions for Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is from 1793 to 1860. The time period kind of deals with slavery in the South. I wanted to call your attention here at the beginning to the third page of the worksheet, and a couple of videos that might be good as accompaniments to this chapter are a video by Steven Spielberg, a movie by Steven Spielberg called Amistad, and also the movie 12 Years a Slave. Both of these videos kind of hit this time period. In the video worksheets, these are links to the previews or the trailers for the video, but I'd encourage you to try to watch one of those two videos as you go through this chapter, Chapter 16. All images, again, reminder that all images and video links are in the public domain, so please don't hesitate to give me a call or an email if you have any questions regarding this. Thank you, and this is Chapter 16. Chapter 16 does not require a whole lot of explanation. I'd like for you to read through it. Hopefully you will learn quite a bit, and don't feel bad if you're offended or appalled by some of the things that are talked about in Chapter 16. It is the plight of the slave in antebellum South in the 1840s and 50s. It's about 10 to 15, 20 years before the Civil War actually takes place. I will point out a couple of things. In particular, number 10 here. Number 10, the answer is found on page 341. And it asks the question, all the whites in the South without slaves had no direct stake in the preservation of slavery, yet they were among the stoutest defenders of this slave system. And so when you look at this paragraph, the bottom of page 341, in this paragraph, it talks about how all whites, let's see if I can get this to underline, all whites without slaves had no direct stake in the preservation of slavery, yet they were the stoutest defenders. The answer is not far to seek. The carrot on the stick ever dangling before their eyes was the hope of buying a slave or two, not necessarily living in a large plantation, but just owning a slave or two. The hope of parlaying their paltry holdings into riches and living this American dream, this upward social mobility. They also took fierce pride in the presumed racial superiority that existed in their minds, which would be watered down if slaves were free. Many of the poorer whites were hardly better off economically than the slaves. Some, indeed, were not so well off. Even the most wretched whites could not be at risk of having African Americans in a better economic status than they would be placed in. So I thought that was a good paragraph to kind of explain number 10. Again, that's on page 341, the last paragraph. And spend some time going through these questions, and hopefully you'll learn some things about the slave system of the South. As you go through the second page of the Chapter 16 questions, you can look at number 13. I'll call your attention to number 13. Sometimes observes that white Southerners who were often reared by black nurses liked the black as an individual, but despised the race. Whereas on page 344, this paragraph on the right-hand side, what was said about the white Northerner, and it mentions that the white Northerner, on the other hand, as opposed to the Southerner, often professed to like the race, but actually disliked the individual. A couple of other questions here, and then we'll skip over to page 348, the burdens of bondage. Notice number 22. that slaves were in fact denied an education. So number 22, the slaves were denied an education. This was important. They didn't want to have a educated slave population, especially in some of the states where slaves, the population was almost as great as the white population. There was constant fear of slave rebellions, as demonstrated by the Nat Turner Rebellion. And so if slaves would have a way of communicating with each other, if slaves would read the local newspapers and they would have a sense of what was going on, their population was as great as the whites, and so they could very easily unite. So denying slaves of an education was extremely important, but it had huge ramifications for the next 100 years. So that's kind of the second couple of things to call to your attention on the second worksheet, second page of the worksheets. If you download this third page, if you download this PDF, you can either just print it out, or if you download it digitally, these images here are links, and these are links. This is a link to the actual preview for the movie Amistad, and this is a preview right here, the trailer for the movie 12 Years a Slave. I'd encourage you to watch one of these two movies as you go through this chapter. Amistad in particular is mentioned, not the movie, but the actual historical event is mentioned in your book on page 348. So on the fourth page of your worksheets, we'll advance to page 350, but I just wanted to call your attention to, the various heroes of this abolitionist movement, of this slavery time period. Sojourner Truth, you have Frederick Douglass, you have William Lloyd Garrison, who is the driving force behind the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. Again, all of these links are in the public domain, and if you download them digitally, these are links to sources that will give you more information about these individuals. Others, of course, in the chapter, Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner. We have Wendell Phillips from Boston, the Golden Trumpet for Abolition. So there's numerous people during this time that are extremely important and heroes for the cause. But by and large, this chapter shows a pretty stark story, or tells a pretty stark story about slavery leading up to the Civil War.